Okay. Well, good morning again, everyone.
Good morning.
So happy to have you all with us. We have a really special program this morning, which I'm not going to actually kick off, but before I pass the mic on to Helen, I believe Maureen has a reflection for us to start with.
I do. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Morning, Maureen.
Our speaker for this morning is Alyssa Telander, and she's a lawyer with the Rocky Mountain Immigration Advocacy Network. We call it REMAIN. I call it REMAIN. It provides free immigration legal services to immigrant children and adults in immigrant detention jails. So I thought it would be good to do a reflection about justice this morning. At a prayer vigil on the eve of the anniversary of George Floyd's murder, Rabbi Salomon Grunwald from the Denver Hebrew Alliance stood up to speak. He shared a familiar passage from the Torah, Tzedek, Tzedek, Tirdof, which when translated into English means justice. Justice you shall pursue. The rabbi pointed out to the gathered that the repetition of the word justice has an important purpose. The first justice modifies the second justice. Hence, the meaning is more like a just justice you shall pursue. How we achieve justice matters as much, if not more so, than the outcome of the justice we pursue. The type of justice we seek matters immensely. The methods we take to get there matter immensely. We must pursue justice that is rooted in just systems, just communities, just hearts, and just outcomes. May it be so.
May it be so. Thank you. Thank you, Maureen. That's very nice. Thank you. Okay. I am going to introduce the person who is going to introduce our speaker. I think some of you, maybe many of you, know Helen, but maybe some of you don't. Helen Thorpe is fairly new to Loretto, but she certainly is not new to the issues that we all care about. Immigration, migration, asylum, refugees, all of those issues. Helen is a co-member in Process, lives in Denver, and Helen has arranged with Alyssa to come and speak to us this morning. Helen herself is an immigrant, having come as a child with her parents from Ireland. And she is an author and a journalist, and she has written extensively on the issues that we all care about. During her co-member in Process time, Helen has agreed to participate with and work with us on the LACC, and we are so happy and enriched by her presence and her knowledge and her expertise and her loveliness. And I want you all to welcome Helen Thorpe. Helen.
Thank you so much. That was such a kind introduction. You can hear that I'm battling a cold. My son was sick and now he's passed it on to me. We're both vaccinated, so there's not much to worry about, but I do sound funny. I just want to say a few words about Remain, and I'm just delighted to be starting the co-membership process and learning more about Loretto. And throughout my time in Denver, many people would come up to me and ask if I knew a lot about Loretto and tell me what work was going on. So it's wonderful to get to know people better now. So Remain is a really remarkable organization that everywhere I turned in my journey writing about immigration or asylum processes, I would bump into amazing attorneys from Remain. And the first instance was when I was accompanying a young woman, a teenager, to her asylum process in the immigration court here in Denver. And there was a lawyer from Remain just going around the waiting room, handing out a business card to everybody sitting there, offering them free pro bono legal service if they didn't have anybody representing them. And later I heard a couple of attorneys from Remain give a talk in Spanish called Know Your Rights to a very large group of immigrants and asylum seekers seeking their legal rights in the system, to explain what they were entitled to them. And so just in all these different ways, I've seen Remain trying to offer legal protection to some of the most vulnerable people seeking legal status in our society. So I'm just thrilled that Alyssa could come talk to us today, and I'm really keen to hear what she has to share with us, because they're really at the forefront of all the legal work that's happening in this arena. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Alyssa.
And before, Alyssa, before you begin to speak, Lydia, it looks like you are sharing your screen with us. Do you know that? Ah, thank you. Thank you. Okay, Alyssa.
Good morning. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. It seems like my internet is a little slow this morning, so let me know if I am breaking up at all. And I also wanted to ask, I don't know if it's possible for me to share my screen. If not, that's
Yeah,
fine.
no, it is.
But
It certainly is. Yes.
okay. Let's see. I'm gonna do that then now. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, and let me see if I can start the slideshow. Okay. Okay, you can still see?
Yes. Good.
Okay, perfect. So thank you for your kind introduction. I'm really happy to be here with you all this morning. I'm not super familiar with the Loretto sisters, but I have interacted some with some of the volunteers that you all support. I used to be a Border Servant Corps volunteer, which is supported by the Lutheran Church, and so had some crossover there. And I know those volunteers do wonderful work and said nothing but wonderful things about the Loretto sisters. So very happy to be here with you this morning. And so just to get started, I just wanted to give a little bit of background about Remain, and I can start with what my position is at Remain. I'm the pro bono coordinating attorney for the children's program. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about both our detention program and our children's program, and our social service program and anti-trafficking program this morning. But just want to let you know that I have more knowledge about what's going on in the children's program because that's where I'm housed. So our detention program, as Helen mentioned, I think serves immigrants who are detained in Colorado. And so I would say that Remain is one of the central service providers for individuals who are detained in Colorado. There are certainly private attorneys who do that work as well, but as far as free legal services, Remain is really at the forefront of that work. And so they do legal orientation, a legal orientation program there, which is very similar to rights that Helen talked about, giving people who are detained an overview of what their rights and options are to both try to get out of detention and then fight their deportation. And then a newer project that Remain has become involved in is working for universal representation. So in the immigration setting, as you may all know, there's no right to a free attorney. There's no public defender, right? So like you would have in criminal court. So most people who go in front of the immigration court don't have an attorney, and that's a significant disadvantage because immigration law is so complicated. And so Remain is working for universal representation, similar to the public defender model for individuals in Colorado. It's been done in some other states. New York is one of the first, but it's not available here in Colorado. And so that's something that we're really fighting for. And we do have funding to provide universal representation to a certain number of people who are detained and are Denver residents. So that's a newer initiative, and working to expand that to other cities around Colorado as well. So definitely a work in progress, but some big wins have been happening on that front lately. And then on the children's program side, we serve children who are detained. So that when children are detained, they are in ORR, or Office of Refugee Resettlement, custody. And so we have a unit, really it's one attorney and one paralegal, who work with all of the children who are in ORR custody in Colorado, and provide them with information about their rights. And then if they end up staying in Colorado, represent them in their full immigration case. And then we also represent children and families with children who are not detained, who are in front of the Denver Immigration Court. And so that looks like a lot of asylum cases for family units. And then it also looks like outside of the immigration court, we do a lot of special immigrant juvenile status cases. So that is a special option that is available for children who have been abused, abandoned, or neglected by one or both of their parents. And if a family court judge decides that it's in their best interest or safer for the child to either stay with the parent who did not abuse, abandon, or neglect them in Colorado, or there's another safe adult that they can live with in Colorado, then they can pursue this status called special immigrant juvenile status, and that's a path to a green card for those children. So that is a really big portion of the children that we work with within the children's program, are children seeking special immigrant juvenile status. We also work with DACA kids, so dreamers who were brought to the United States by their parents at a young age generally, and have been here for most of their lives. As you may know, they are eligible for DACA, which provides temporary protection from deportation and work authorization. And the government just recently started accepting initial applications for DACA again, rather than only renewals. And so there's been a greater need for representation for those young people as well. And then we also provide services to individuals, a lot of times parents with children who are survivors of domestic violence or serious crimes, because there are special protections under the Violence Against Women Act for those individuals. And there's also a special visa called the U visa for survivors of serious crimes. And so we work on those cases as well. And we also, as I put here at the bottom, we have an anti-trafficking project. So we're able to work with survivors of human trafficking as well, and help them pursue something called a T visa, which is a special option for those individuals. And then one of the things that I think is unique and pretty special about Remain is our social service project. Most legal nonprofits do not have any capacity to help with the myriad of other needs that their clients have. And that can be really taxing on immigration attorneys when you're focused on their immigration case, but they're also becoming homeless or have severe mental health issues that they're coping with as a result of trauma or things like that. And as attorneys, we're really not trained to address those issues. And so it's wonderful that we have social workers on our staff who can assist with those types of needs. And we have 3 wonderful social workers who do a wonderful job working with individuals who are coping with all the challenges of detention, and then also working with some of our children clients as well. So that just gives you an overview of sort of all of the pieces of the pie that we have our hands in. So next, I just wanted to talk a little bit about where people are coming from that we serve. So a large percentage of the people that we serve come from what's called the Northern Triangle, which is in red here. So that's Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras. There have been really high numbers of individuals coming from those countries for several years now, as you probably are aware. And then we also see a lot of people coming from Mexico and Venezuela and Nicaragua. Venezuela and Nicaragua, especially more recently, due to a lot of the political and economic turmoil in those countries. And then we've also seen a recent influx of detainees from Brazil in Colorado, just in the last few weeks, actually. And so that's really just a result of where they've moved people around due to bed space. But we've had to really pivot to provide services. We didn't even have any interpreters or translators to assist us with Brazilian Portuguese, so I had to really, on the fly kind of figure out how we were going to serve that population. And then we also have individuals from all over the world, because people from all over the world flee persecution and come to the United States for many compelling reasons. So, okay. And then I wanted to focus a good portion of what I talk about today on what's new under the Biden administration. And I think there's some things that are really, we can be hopeful about, and some things that continue to be challenges. And so I wanted to talk about some of those issues, and then talk about how those are impacting our work currently as well. So right after Biden's inauguration in January, we saw a real flurry of activity around immigration, really in his first 2 to 3 weeks in office. And so a few of the positive things that happened right away were a repeal of the Muslim ban, stopping construction of the border wall, stopping the attempt to not count immigrants in the census, reinstating deferred enforced departure for Liberians, which is just a temporary protection, allowing the Liberians to remain in the United States due to the conditions in their country. And then suspending also 2 programs that were in effect at the border, which basically, basically provided fast track asylum review, which, as you can imagine, is not very thorough and has all sorts of due process concerns associated with that. And so those were stopped as well. So those are all concrete wins that happened right away. So very good news. But then a lot of the executive orders and presidential proclamations that we saw in January really did not take immediate action. A lot of these orders directed various federal agencies to review X thing and then report back to the Biden administration with recommendations. And so I think some immigrant advocates were hoping that there would be faster action in some of these areas than there has been. But these are some of the areas where they are reviewing what they might do. So one thing is enforcement priorities, and we actually have seen some positive action from ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, regarding their enforcement priorities. They have put out a statement saying that they are potentially open to reviewing alternatives to detention and alternatives to deportation as well in certain compelling cases. So we still have yet to see that really go into effect. Supposedly, DHS is still waiting for guidance from on high on what they can say yes to that we might ask them for. But we're really hopeful that that's going to come out soon. The Biden administration also directed an equity review on the federal government level, directed actions to shore up DACA for Dreamers, created a task force to look at recommendations to reunify families, which of course, family separation was a big issue under the Trump administration. Also looking at addressing causes of migration in those Northern Triangle countries. So, whoops, sorry, I don't know. I'm pressing my my mouse and it's skipping. So sorry about that. So addressing causes of migration in those Northern Triangle countries that we talked about in Central America, reviewing some of the agreements we had with those countries to basically allow us to fast track deport people. And then looking at things like integration programs for new arrivals. So that's the task force on new Americans, looking at how to make naturalization more accessible, reviewing refugee admissions, which I'll talk more about a little bit later, and then reviewing expedited removal, which is a fast track deportation that happens at the border. So none of these things, we haven't seen much concrete action in any of these areas yet, but hopefully we will. But there's no real timeline for that either. So it's a little loosey-goosey right now. Okay, one thing that I'm really hopeful and excited about and hope will be a really positive thing is that Biden did set a timeline for the government to make a decision about how they're going to address specific asylum claims. So specifically, this impacts individuals who are seeking asylum because they have experienced domestic violence, as well as individuals who are seeking asylum because they were targeted by gang members for violence, extortion, recruitment, what have you. The Biden administration is expecting to make a call on how they're going to address those asylum claims this fall, and then issue some regulations on it early next year. And so I'm hopeful that that will help a lot of our clients if they make the right call to basically open up more room for those claims. I wanted to talk really briefly about the Remain in Mexico program. This has been a hot topic in the news for sure. That was a program that started under the Trump administration. Biden paused it, then started letting people into the United States, and then it was actually formally ended on Tuesday. So at Remain, we've been seeing more people coming to us who were previously in the Migrant Protection Protocols, which is the formal name for Remain in Mexico, somewhat ironically, in my opinion. So unfortunately, the Biden administration has not taken any action and continues to defend something called Title 42, which is basically it's a way to turn people away at the border, including asylum seekers and for a while unaccompanied children based on public health rationale because of coronavirus. And so tens of thousands of asylum seekers have been turned away at the border just on this grounds. And the Biden administration continues to defend it, even though there are huge concerns about how that violates our human rights commitments. Just wanted to highlight this issue as well very briefly. Under the Trump administration, they really, I guess, strengthened and increased their implementation of the so-called wealth test used to deny green cards. So basically screening and denying anyone who's under a certain income level and preventing them from applying for a green card and getting it if they would otherwise be eligible. Under the Biden administration, they dropped their appeal to try to defend that. And so that is no longer in effect. Huge win for a lot of immigrants. Refugee admissions has been more of a struggle. So Trump lowered refugee admissions to an extremely low level, the lowest level in history. And there was really great concerns about that for obvious reasons. On the campaign trail and early in his administration, Biden promised to raise admissions to 125,000 a year from 15,000, and then backtracked on that. And only after outrage from the immigrant advocacy community has now raised that to 62,500 per year. So still not as high as was promised and what is really needed. So that continues to be a concern. And sorry I'm going so quickly, but I just want to touch on all of these hot topics and then we'll definitely make sure we have time for questions. So I think another thing that has been in the news a lot on the immigration front is talking about there being a crisis of unaccompanied minors entering at the US-Mexico border. And this is, I think, intelligent minds can disagree about the terminology here, and I'm really speaking from my own opinion or perspective here. But I think that the rhetoric around the entry of unaccompanied minors at the US-Mexico border being an unprecedented crisis that shows that Biden's immigration policies are ineffective or problematic, I think that's political rhetoric that doesn't really reflect the reality of the situation. The numbers have certainly gone up of unaccompanied minors entering over the past few months to year. But that's nothing new. We've seen numbers go up and down, over many years for a variety of reasons. And I think right now there's some additional push factors such as horrific hurricanes that have happened in Central America that have been driving people to come here because they no longer have a home because it was destroyed. But I don't think that this is something that we've never seen before, and I don't think it shows that there's a failure of our immigration policy necessarily. I think it shows that things go up and down and numbers go up and down for a variety of reasons. So just my 2 cents on that. I wanted to talk a little bit about children immigration of children in general. So I think some people are really surprised. You all may not be part of this group, but I think many people are surprised to know that kids are deported and that they are not granted really any substantive protections in the immigration and deportation system. They are largely treated the same as adults under immigration law. They also don't have a right to an attorney. They don't have any of the protections that they would have in other types of court proceedings. And then the other issue that we've been seeing under the Trump administration, they created an expedited, like a fast track docket for family unit asylum seekers. And that went away for a while during the coronavirus pandemic because courts were closed for so long. And then just this week, we found out that they're basically starting up the same process again, which is very concerning because it basically fast tracks these asylum claims for family units, which makes it more difficult for them to prepare a strong case. So very concerning. Just to talk briefly about children that Remain serves. So we serve children in a variety of different situations. So we serve children who have lived in the United States for many years, who do not have legal status here. So a good example of that would be Dreamers. We serve children who have recently entered with their parents. We serve unaccompanied children in Office of Refugee Resettlement custody. So those are the child-specific detention facilities. We serve unaccompanied children who have been released to a sponsor in the United States, who are in the Colorado area. We serve children who maybe entered lawfully with a tourist visa or some other type of visa and are now out of status because they overstayed. And we also serve citizen children in mixed status families because we do not require that in order to qualify for our services, the children in the family do not have to be undocumented. If it's a family with children and a parent needs immigration services, we will still serve them because it is beneficial to those children for their parent to be here and continue to care for them, for example. So those are the people that we serve in the children's program. And then I just wanted to talk a little bit briefly about what we've been seeing in terms of trends. So I don't have permission to share specific client stories, but I wanted to share some trends to kind of highlight what we have been seeing recently. So I think I mentioned that we had an influx of Brazilian individuals at the detention center. Before that, at the beginning of the Biden administration, we were actually seeing lower numbers at the detention center, fewer individuals being detained until this influx of Brazilian detainees arrived. We've been seeing more children who are recent arrivals recently rather than children who've been here for some time. And I think that has to do a lot with there being a new administration and people being more hopeful that there might be more options for them. And also the hurricanes, like I mentioned, that's really driving a lot of people to come here. And I've been seeing a lot more families citing the hurricanes destroying their homes as a central reason for them deciding to come to the United States. And then we're also seeing more people who were in the Remain in Mexico program now having been permitted to enter the United States, arriving in Colorado and seeking legal services. And then we're also seeing higher numbers of children in the Office of Refugee Resettlement facilities in Colorado. I think because more children are arriving at the border and because we've seen an outcry against Customs and Border Protection or the Border Patrol from keeping children too long in their facilities at the border, we've now seen recently an increase of the numbers in the ORR facilities, which is where children are supposed to be housed before they can be reunited with a sponsor if possible. And then I think other than that, we are still seeing large numbers of individuals fleeing family violence, both child abuse and domestic violence. We're seeing large numbers of people fleeing their home countries due to gang violence and threats, either demanding money from them or actively trying to recruit young people into the gangs and threatening them if they resist that recruitment. And then, as always, poverty continues to be a driving factor, driving people to come to the United States. So just wanted to speak a little bit about those trends. And then we'll open it up for questions as well. But before I do that, I just wanted to flag our web page where you can find ways that you can support our organization. So I included that here, and I can send that around afterwards too, if that would be helpful. But we have specific volunteer opportunities for pro bono attorneys, attorneys who are willing to volunteer their time to provide free legal services with our support and mentorship. We have opportunities for mental health and medical professionals to work with our clients, both to provide them with therapy and medical care, as well as helping to support their immigration claims by explaining what they're going through. We also have need for volunteer interpreters and translators in all languages. So if anyone has a language skill other than English, that would certainly be welcome. And we have opportunities for students to volunteer with us. You can also join our mailing list on that page and also make donations on that page. So I know I went through all of that very quickly, and it's a lot of information, but definitely wanted to open up some time for questions.
Okay, thank you, Alyssa, so much. If you
Absolutely.
could stop sharing, then we'll
Yes.
come to where we can see everyone, I think.
Okay. Are we back to normal?
Let's see, I think we are. I had you spotlighted. I want to make sure I have removed the spotlight. I think I have. Okay, and I'm going to go back to gallery view. There we are. Okay, now I see everyone. Okay. Well, again, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
That was very thorough. Much of that information, some of us had some knowledge of, but you really put it all together in a wonderful package for us. We really appreciate that. It was really quite instructive.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
And now I can see everyone here. Anyone have any questions? Just wave at me or, okay, Helen, sure, Helen.
Thank you, Alyssa. That was really amazing. You're doing even more work than I knew about. I have a question, and this, falls maybe a little outside your territory, but I've always wondered why it is that people facing gang violence who have to leave because of their own safety, I've always wondered why they enter our country as asylum seekers and why it is that they're not given refugee status. Could you speak to that? I understand that, the United Nations would need to designate them refugees, but I don't know why it doesn't happen. To me, it seems like they would have a stronger legal case.
Yeah. I think that's a wonderful question and very much on point. I think, there are many reasons why it seems like those individuals would fall under the refugee category. I personally think it's political. And I think, I really think that we don't want to designate certain countries as qualifying for refugee status, because then we fear that we would have an influx of people who would qualify.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, and I think the US government doesn't want to open the door to that. I think there are probably, others who could speak much more intelligently on that, but I think that's my gut instinct, is that it's really a political consideration. And on the asylum front, it's been such a battle to fight for those individuals to qualify for asylum based on gang violence, because the definition of asylum is quite narrow and requires that you prove that the government in your country of origin either cannot or will not protect you from the individuals who want to harm you. And the immigration judges are generally very unwilling to recognize that in most cases. So that has been a battle. I'm hopeful that maybe with these regulations that we're going to see come out early next year, maybe there will be some positive movement on that front. I really have my fingers crossed for that, because I think that would be many of our clients.
Alyssa,
Thank
can you
you.
give us a quick, what's the distinction between an asylum seeker and a refugee?
So a refugee is someone who gets refugee status when they are abroad. And so I've never actually worked on a refugee case, so I'm not super well versed in all of the nuances of the process, but essentially they have to apply and be approved for refugee status abroad, and then they enter the United States as a refugee, and only a certain number of people can come in, which is why I was talking about that refugee admissions cap previously. And so they meter how many people can come in per year, and then they enter with refugee status.
And is it also true that our government designates which countries or which areas are producing refugees that we might even consider?
Yeah.
And well, the United Nations plays a big role in the process, and our government chooses by category which countries we will accept refugees from, but we don't designate, the United States doesn't designate who is a refugee. That's a United Nations function.
Right. The United Nations has developed the definition of who is a refugee. And so they need to be fleeing persecution, basically, in their country of origin as well, similar to an asylum seeker. But yeah, the countries are limited.
And the hope of many in civil society at the United Nations is that the definition of refugee will be extended to include climate refugees.
Yeah.
Although that has not happened yet.
I think that makes a lot of sense.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Yeah, all right.
I had a question, Alyssa, about appeals. Do Remain lawyers volunteer to help with appeals if they've been denied their first try?
Yeah, we do. So we oftentimes try to plug in pro bono volunteer attorneys into doing appeals, because we have quite a few volunteers who are interested in that work. And so our staff attorneys do appeals as well on for the clients that they represent. We don't generally go, we go to the Board of Immigration Appeals, which is the next level up from the immigration court. We don't generally go to the circuit court, which would be the next level after that for appeal. But sometimes we will refer people to other resources for that if they end up wanting to go that route.
I have very limited experience, but the folks that I went to their hearing, they had no representation the first time, so they're denied. And then we go back and try to find somebody to take their appeal. Thank you.
Yeah, we definitely can help those individuals. Yeah, and I think I would probably try first to connect them with a volunteer attorney. That's my job at Remain, is to find volunteers to take cases so we can expand our reach. And so definitely, if they are income qualified, we could consider representing them.
Alyssa, how large is your organization?
We're about 35 now. We've had a lot of growth recently, and I'm one of the newbies. I've only been at Remain for 6 months, so I'm definitely part of that expansion. So that's been exciting to hear about
And
how they-
that's about 35 full-time staff, not counting your volunteer pro bono lawyers?
that's right.
Mhm. And do you coordinate with other organizations who do similar work to yours in other cities or states?
We do quite a bit. In our detention program, they work a lot with IRC, which is a national organization. And we work a lot locally with other organizations in Colorado, including organizations that are more community organizing and policy advocacy focused, to try to support work they're doing at the Colorado State Legislature and things like that. Yeah, we have a lot of partners that we collaborate with in a variety of different ways, both national level and state level.
We have a member of our Latin America Caribbean Committee, a member of Loretto, who is not with us this morning because she is a full-time employee of the organization called KIND,
Mhm.
Kids in Need of Defense.
Yep.
And she's in New York City.
Mhm.
And from what I have heard from Molly, her job is very similar to yours. She is the liaison to the pro bono lawyers.
Yes, their program is very similar to our program in many ways. Yeah, so definitely.
Remain is, as I understand it, either the only or the largest entity like this in this area. And the significance of Remain came home for me when I was at their fundraising annual event one year early in the Trump administration. And the big drama at that time was that the Trump administration had essentially targeted organizations like this to be defunded and was trying to eliminate their existence because it would make, the job of the Trump administration so much easier in pursuing their agenda. And it was really the intervention of senators in Colorado that kept some of Remain's funding in place that allowed the organization to continue. And I think that was just a really like a wake-up call moment for many in the community to understand, how needed these services are and how bad it would be if something like Remain were to go away, and how we need, we wish we could have Remain times 10 and we would still have unmet need. It was very illuminating.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. Anyone else? Pat, did I see your hand?
Yes, I was wondering if Alyssa could say a bit more about the fast track docket that began under Trump and now has begun again. I don't quite understand the fast track docket.
Yeah, so under the Trump administration, we called it the family unit docket, or the FAMU docket. And basically how it works is rather than handling every case on a case-by-case basis and setting deadlines appropriate for that case based on what's going on with that case and what's needed, which is generally how most cases are approached. Cases for individuals who entered the United States after a certain date as a family unit are put in this docket process, and the deadlines for everything in removal proceedings are sped up. So basically the court dates are all set from square one, so they're given a very short time frame to do the first step of the case, which is entering pleadings, which is essentially basically admitting or denying what the government is trying to prove against you, that you entered the United States illegally or what have you. And then a very quick deadline for submitting applications, for example, the application for asylum. And then a quick deadline also for the final hearing. So really, what the result ends up looking like is that it's harder for people to find attorneys to represent them because a lot of attorneys are scared away by the fast deadlines. And then there's a smaller pool of attorneys who are willing to take on those cases. And then when the attorneys do take on those cases, they have much less time to prepare their evidence in support of the applications and to prepare the applications to begin with. So it's really a due process issue in terms of allowing sufficient time to prepare and really lumping everyone in the same cookie cutter mold for the case rather than handling cases appropriately based on what's going on with the case.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I have a specific question, Alyssa. The immigrants who come to Colorado
Mhm.
from some border entry, I'm sure. Is it the case that they have, especially when you say that the Remain in Mexico program has now been totally abolished as of this week? Does that mean that people who have been stuck in Mexico for such a long period of time are now being allowed to come and have a credible fear interview? And if they pass that, then they might be moved on to Colorado or somewhere else?
So usually they already had their credible fear interview in the Remain in Mexico process and may have even had one or two hearings that they entered the United States for and then had to go back to Mexico to wait for the next one. And so people are coming kind of in various postures. You know, some have had, you know, no hearings, some have had several hearings, but usually I think most that I've seen recently have at least had a hearing and are somewhere in the middle of the court process.
And so they come across the border and they are quickly transported to Colorado or New York or wherever?
Usually fairly quickly, but they have to have somewhere to go. So they have to have a contact, a family member or friend or somebody that they can go stay with. And I spoke to somebody recently who had a terrible situation where they said they had a friend to live with and it was somebody they barely knew, and then they had like no food where they went and had to go somewhere else and then became homeless. So there have been issues, I think, with some of the people, especially if they don't have a lot of ties in the United States, figuring out where to go.
Yeah. Okay.
Alyssa, are you seeing folks seeking asylum from Africa at Remain?
Some,
Mhm.
yeah, some. Definitely more from Central and South America overall, but we have people from any country you can imagine.
Well, we're approaching the 1 hour point. Helen, I wonder if you have any final comments you'd like to share.
Sure. I just wanted to really thank Alyssa for her incredibly clear explanation and of all these issues. And I find that for myself, even though, you know, my parents immigrated here with me and I grew up with a green card and later I became naturalized, understanding immigration law and then the separate category of the laws that apply to asylum seekers and the separate category of laws that apply to refugees is so challenging as a layperson, and the laws are constantly changing. So I think it's incredible to have a resource like Remain of attorneys really focused on this particular area of the law where people are generally underserved, and understanding these issues is so important. So the expertise at Remain is, I think, just really precious. And over the years, people at Remain have explained things to me over and over again in a variety of settings. And I always am needing their help understanding these really complex and hard to follow, ever evolving, set of laws. So thank you, Alyssa, for making it understandable for all of us and getting us up to speed. And we really appreciate it. This was a wonderful talk.
You sure do. Thank you
Thanks
so
so much.
much.
Yeah.
It was
Hi.
great to be here and meet all of you.
Alyssa, would you recommend, we always like to end with an action. And would you recommend contacting our representatives continually about 42? We just had a speaker a month or so ago that's been down in the border in Texas. And she said they're allowing some people who have been denied under Title 42 to come in, but there's very few exceptions. Or should we, ask that they direct immunizations down there, or what? Do you have like a little snapshot of something we could do?
I think there have been several public health experts that have said that Title 42 is not actually really effectively protecting public health. And so I think citing to some of those experts and talking to representatives and senators on the federal level about Title 42 is important. I think the refugee cap as well, I think continuing to push on that is important too. And I think continuing to push for immigration reform, right? That was being talked about as a hot topic at the beginning of the Biden administration and then kind of dropped off. So I think as much pressure as our representatives and senators can feel on those issues, the better, for sure.
Okay, thank you. And I just want to say for folks in Denver, they're starting a fast next week because they feel like immigration issues have dropped off the table. And so we're meeting at the state capitol on Monday from 1 to 2:30. And you can go online and hear about the recommendations to fast. And I might not have thought that that would be effective, but the Dreamers came to Denver and fasted, and Obama started DACA, and a group of us went to DC in a fast, and ICE pulled back during the Obama administration on their priorities for deportation. So I do think that those actions make a difference. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally in agreement on all of those points.
So I have one announcement to make, and if anyone else does, feel free to jump in after this. But the next Immigration Spotlight is scheduled for 2 weeks from this morning. And our speaker will be Alyssa McMahon, I believe is the last name. She is our Loretto volunteer who is just winding up her year at Las Americas in El Paso. Do you know them, Alyssa?
I lived in El Paso for a while before I ended up here.
Okay.
So I love Las Americas.
Loretto has quite a presence in El Paso and has for many, many years. And so we have 3 or 4 Loretto volunteers who do a year of service there. And Alyssa is her name, and she's been working with Las Americas. So she's going to come and talk to us about her experience there. So please join us 2 weeks from today.
Is that the 18th?
Yes, it is.
Okay,
Yes.
thanks.
Anybody else?
Looks like Pat's got
Yeah,
a hand
sure,
up.
Pat.
I just want to say to Helen Thorpe, I want to thank her for her wonderful book, The Newcomers. I read it at least 3 years ago, and I loved it. And I'm delighted that you are now in the co-membership program. Wonderful.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alyssa.
Thanks. Have a great day.